Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to see the neuroscientific perspectives of language learning. Dear friends, language is very important in everyone's life. The human beings are so-called Homo sapiens. The special characteristic of any human being is language. We are the only living organisms in this world who are capable of speaking, and by this language we influence each other, and this language is the mind's most enchanting process. And we like some people because of their language, and we dislike some people because of their language. So language has a very good impact on people, and language is the highly cognitive task, and it is believed that learning mathematics and physics, chemistry, these are the very tough subjects, and it is very difficult subjects to understand, and they are not the highly cognitive task, but learning the language is the highly cognitive task. So dear friends, we should understand that language learning and proficiency in any language is not an easy task, and it means that if a person is highly proficient in a language, that means that he is having a high intelligence and his cognitive skills are very much okay. So language learning is a highly cognitive task, and it is a unique kind of abstraction which is very fundamental to the cognition. So human language development, when you see, when the child at the time of birth, the child is simply listening to the language, and after 1 or 2 years the child starts speaking the language, and after 3-4 years the child masters his mother tongue, and afterwards when it goes to the school it starts learning another language on the basis of the first language or the mother tongue. So language development of a child, of a human being, is a unique kind of abstraction which is basic to the cognitive development or cognitive processing. And any information in the form of the language we receive only through the language, whether it is a written information or auditory information. We used to receive any input for our processing only through the language. So information processing is nothing but the information that we receive with the help of a language, that the brain processes it, and it is called the input. After the processing we reply, or we give the output, or in the form of reading or writing or speaking. So language processing is an important component of information processing. Not only that, with the help of the language the human beings think and they solve the problem. They use the language for that, isn't it? When we face some problems, we used to sit, we used to think, we used to analyze, we used to find a suitable solution for our problems. So human thinking involves language, but for language no thinking at all. Or if you want to think but for language, there should be some other extraordinary situations like deaf or dumb. So for all the human beings who are capable of hearing and speech, they think only with the help of language, and they try to solve the problem. And language is fundamental to one's perception. It is a fundamental aspect of cognition. So when we want to perceive, when we perceive our concepts, our ideas, our understanding, everything depends upon our language. So language has a great share in the perception of one's cognition. So language is said to be a highly cognitive task. And if you want to be a proficient achiever in a language, you should have the mastery of that language in terms of its phonology, axiology, and grammar, and other aspects of language called suprasegmental features. So everything is very important. Then only we are said to be a master in the particular language. So The knowledge of words and knowledge of sentence formation, everything is important for language learning. That's why language learning is said to be a highly cognitive process. And there are many people, linguists, who study the language, and when some researchers, they study how the language is acquired, like in cognitive science. Cognitive science is an important discipline of 21st century, and language is the fundamental aspect of cognition. So they study how language helps for cognition and knowledge. And some other group of people, researchers, they study what is the connection between language and mind, or language and the brain, how people think with or without language, how language play a crucial role in thinking and all. What is the relationship between psychology and language. So they are called psycholinguists. So language acquisition, language production, language comprehension also studied by psycholinguists. And this area of discipline, or this discipline, is called psycholinguistics, which deals with psychological aspects of the language and psychological states and the mental activities that are going on in our brain, how we learn a language, acquire language and use a language. So these aspects are dealt with by psycholinguistics. And dear friends, we know in our brain we have a major part of the brain like this. That is, our brain can be divided into three major parts: cerebrum, cerebellum and medulla oblongata. So we are dividing our brain into three major parts, and each the brain is divided into each hemisphere. That is, two hemispheres are there, left side and right side, left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. So the brain is divided into vertically two parts, they are hemisphere, and each hemisphere has four important lobes depending upon the position of the brain. That is, if you have the front side of the lobes, they are called frontal lobe, and back side of the brain lobes are called, they are just behind our eyes, they are called occipital lobe, and parietal lobe are at the topmost position of our brain, and temporal lobes besides our ear. So our brain is here divided into frontal lobes, occipital lobes, parietal lobes and temporal lobes depending upon the position. Likewise, each lobe has its specific role in language and other cognitive activities. So this is the cerebrum, the minor part of the brain, and all the lobes together, it is called as the major part of the brain, that is cerebrum. So this is the portion medulla oblongata. So brain, we can divide it into three major parts: cerebrum, cerebellum and medulla oblongata. And the cerebrum is divided into four lobes. These four lobes are present on either side, that is the left and right side of the brain. So these are the major parts of the brain: cerebrum, brain stem. And one more aspect of brain, that is called limbic system. It is the inner part of the brain. So the outer surface we can see some extent, but the inner part that lies inside the brain is called the limbic system, which is nothing but emotional part of the brain. This part is very much responsible for our emotions, and all the emotions originate from this area, that is limbic system. So let us know as human beings, also as academicians, what are the major parts of the brain, because every day we are dealing with many kinds of the brain. So it is our duty to understand what are the major parts are there in our brain, and especially today's program or today's lecture deals with what is the connection between language and the brain. So if you take the brain, all the mental activities They are taking place inside the brain, and all cognitive tasks are specialized in any part of almost all the parts of the brain. There are many brain areas. For example, the important areas for language learning or speaking are Broca's area, which lies in the left side of the frontal lobes, and Vernix area, which is responsible for our understanding the meaning, that is comprehensive area of the brain is called Vernix area, and Broca's area is responsible for speaking, that is called motor area. Suppose now I am taking the classes, I am speaking. If my speaking ability is good and I can articulate my speech organs like tongue, pharynx, larynx, teeth, everything, the speech organs which are inside my mouth, I am articulating this, moving my speech organs for better speaking. That is result of the Broca's area. If my Broca's area is good, then only I can speak. Suppose if somebody is affected by paralysis or some brain diseases, if this area is impaired, then I could not speak properly. So Broca's area and Vernix area, they are two major areas in our brain which are responsible for speaking and understanding. And Vernix area is known by different names, and it is for understanding. And there are some other areas like angular gyrus, motor cortex and all, visual cortex. So here in this picture you can see what are the motor area. So for example, if you see this, this is the motor area due to which the words are pronounced, and this is the Broca's area. See here, this is the Broca's area which controls speech, which is responsible for speaking, and this portion is called angular gyrus, which transforms visual representations into auditory code, and this is the visual cortex. And when we see or when we visualize text or pictures or written words, this area gets stimulated. This is called visual cortex, and this is the Vernix area. Whatever we see or whatever we hear, when we understand the message, this particular area is working hard for that. So this is Vernix area. So suppose if I have any problem in my speech or in my writing or in my understanding, that is called aphasia. Aphasia means some problem with language and language disorder due to a problem in the brain. So there are many problems like halting speech and not speaking properly and not understanding the words, nonsensical speech. So these are all called aphasia. If Broca's aphasia denotes speaking disabilities or speaking problems, and Vernix area Vernix aphasia denotes some understanding problem, or when we are understanding, we are not following it properly. So this brain hemisphere, these are the two hemispheres of the brain, and we can divide equally into two parts. So each hemisphere, when it is on each side of our body, left and right side, these two hemispheres are responsible. They play an important role in our language acquisition, language learning, and they have some specialized abilities or specialized functions in language learning. For example, if you take a left hemisphere, this hemisphere is responsible for detecting surprises. That is, this area, suppose if anything is happening that is very unusual or the matter of surprise, this left hemisphere is responsible. So it is adept in detecting the surprise. And this hemisphere, the whole brain is capable or responsible for language learning, but each hemisphere processes the information in different way. For example, if you take the left hemisphere, it processes the information in a relational manner, and it involves two different representations. That means it wants anything to be compared or processed with the help of one another. That is called processing information in a relational manner. So this hemisphere is demarcated from the right hemisphere with the help of inferior frontal gyrus and precentral gyrus. So right hemisphere, if you take, they are adept, they are expert in doing some other language functions, like they are responsible for identifying rhythm, fantasy, and emotions, imagination. These are all the right brain activities. So this right brain processes the information in a holistic manner, and it is responsible for appreciation of language aspects like coherence, many meanings of a same word, and it is responsible, it plays a superior role in creative activities of spatial perception, etc. So left brain and right brain, they are somewhat different in the language functions. One hemisphere is said to be dominant hemisphere. For example, those who are writing with their right hand, most of the people, 95% of the people are left brain dominant. That means we are writing with the help of right hand. But few people, say for example 5% of the people, they are writing with the left hand. That means they have right brain as their dominant hemisphere. So the dominant hemisphere is the major hemisphere, and the non-dominant hemisphere is the minor hemisphere. That means if one hemisphere, most of the time for language learning, the left brain is responsible. The left brain is actively engaged in the language functions, whereas the minor hemisphere is also performing many functions regarding to language learning. For example, it perceives non-linguistic environmental sounds, it comprehends visually presented words and especially the concrete nouns, and it matches the auditory with visual names or description, and it spells auditorily presented words, and this minor hemisphere is responsible for processing the intonation patterns. So this hemisphere also involved in mediating the emotional responses and making some judgments and understanding the jokes, and like that it performs certain cognitive skills related to language. And so first we studied about this Broca's area, and this Broca's area is very much important, a very important and dominant language learning part in our brain. This is situated in the lower part of our frontal lobe, that means somewhat here in the left hemisphere near the motor cortex, and it is in the nearer to this prefrontal cortex. This portion is called prefrontal cortex, and this Broca's area is very much nearer to the prefrontal cortex, and it is in the partly in the motor area of the cortex, and it is dominant on the left side of the brain. Always it should be. If it is not dominant, due to which we have some problem also, and this because of this Broca's area, we are pronouncing the words properly with the help of the speech organs inside our throat, inside our mouth. That is, this part is called larynx, and these muscles are getting operated, and with the help of our nose, tongue, teeth, and everything. So when we articulate the speech organs properly in our mouth, we are pronouncing the words with proper intonation, proper phonology, etc. So this Broca's area is very important for language learning, and this is named after Dr. Paul Broca, who held responsible for identifying this particular part in the pronunciation of words. So he invented this area, and so this part is named after Paul Broca, and it is called Broca's area. Now we can see where does the Broca's area lies in our brain. See, this is the Broca's area. This part is the Broca's area, and this is the prefrontal area, and this Broca's area is lying at the lower part of the frontal lobe and besides the prefrontal cortex. So this Broca's area plays a very dominant role in our language aspects. So this is the important part of the brain for language learning, and it is called a motor area, which controls the articulation of the speech. It provides neural circuit for word formation also. That means I am speaking a word and I am thinking a particular word. For example, in the examination, synonyms were asked for certain words. I am thinking and I am bringing to my brain that particular word, and if I want to pronounce that word, I need this area's help. So it provides neural circuit for word formation, and it is responsible for motor expression, where words, phrases are initiated and executed, and this Broca's areas, it works in close association with our Vernix area. So next we are going to next important area in our brain for language aspect, that is Vernix area. It lies in the temporal lobe near the ear of the left hemisphere. Suppose Broca's area is here, Vernix area is here near the ear. So it is called by many names because it based upon its function. It is called general interpretative area, gnostic area, knowing area, tertiary association area. People used to call by different names because of its function, because it plays a dominant role in understanding the meaning of the words, that is comprehension of the word. This area is present in both the hemisphere, whereas in the major hemisphere this is somewhat enlarged, and it is closely associated with the primary hearing area and secondary hearing area in the temporal lobe. Since this part is very close to the ears, so it is near to the auditory cortex, whereas the Broca's area is very near to the prefrontal cortex. This Vernix area is very near to the auditory cortex. So this area, Vernix area, is play a dominant role in understanding of the meaning of the words, sentences, phrases, the text. Or suppose if I read the book, I am thoroughly understanding the meaning because of my Vernix area, which is properly functioning in the brain. So Vernix area is close relation, is introduction of language by hearing, because first language is the language is learned by orally, isn't it? When people speak, they learn the language. Before written language, the people communicate with each other only because of the oral communication. So that's why this area is working besides the hearing area. So in this picture you can see that this is the Vernix area, which is called by many names as we just see. So these two parts are very important for language learning. Then there is another important area in our brain which is responsible for speech or language is Arcuate fasciculus. Arcuate fasciculus is nothing but the bundles which connect the Vernix area and the Broca's area. So there is a fiber, there is a bundle of fibers which are connecting these two important areas, that is Broca's area with Vernix area. And suppose I am hearing the speech and I understand with the help of my Vernix area, and then I am trying to speak that information with the help of my motor area, that is Broca's area. So there must be some connection between these two areas, and this is whatever I understand, it must be properly processed by Broca's area. So this is responsible for simultaneous translation. So the auditory input is converted into speech input. Suppose I am hearing with the help of my mobile, and I am, after listening to my whoever speaks to with me, then I give the reply. So for that giving the reply, this area is very much important, because this area convert the auditory input into speech input. So by now we can understand how this area is very, very important. So here you can see the that is the arcuate fasciculus, the area which connects the fibers, bundle of fibers which connect Broca's area with auditory area. So now you understand. Next there is another important part in our brain, that is Broadband's area. So far we discussed two areas. They are Broca's area, Vernix area. Now we are coming to the third one, that is Broadband's area. It is involved in relating visual and auditory input to stored meaning representation. That means I am reading the book, I stored that information in my brain. Also I just visualize certain things, and that information also stored in my brain. So in order to store the visual and auditory input, this part is playing a major share. So it is responsible for movement of the articulators and specifically controls speech aspects of the oral tract. So this along with the Broca's area, this Broadband area is also responsible for our speech, that is also motor area. Next I have another important area in my brain, that is called Thalamus. You know, Thalamus is a sensory relay station, that is whatever we receive from our body, it will be understood by the brain with the help of this Thalamus, and whatever the brain sends the information through signals to the body, it will be received and sent to the various parts of the body. So actually it is acting as a relay station in our brain. So language functions are lateralized in the thalamus like in the cortex. That means we have both the hemispheres, we have language areas. Like that, in both the hemispheres we have thalamus. So it integrates frontal and parietal language areas, and it is responsible for speech production and attention to specific verbal aspects of external environment. And we are coming to the next part in our brain, that is primary auditory cortex. Auditory cortex, it is always goes with hearing. So if we hear the language, if the information is received through auditory mode, this primary auditory cortex, it will process the auditory information. It is also situated in the left hemisphere corresponding to the right hemisphere. So it is also there in the both the hemispheres. So in order to process the speech, whatever we hear, that is for example in my lecture, now you are listening to my speech through audio as well as through video. So the auditory information is processed by the primary auditory cortex. Where is it? Here, near the temporal lobe, primary auditory cortex, that is near the Vernix area. Already we have seen that Vernix area and the primary auditory cortex are closely linked. They are very much near. Then primary visual cortex. Whatever information that we receive through visuals or by seeing with the help of our eyes, they are processed with the help of primary visual cortex. So dear friends, if you are listening to my PPT, if you see my PPT, that information, whatever is read by you, by seeing the visuals, then this particular area, that is primary visual cortex, is responsible for the processing of the visual information. So the whole brain, due to the advent of the neuroscience and other things, now it is possible to brine mapping, that is, which part of the brain is doing which function, which cognitive function, or which aspect of the language learning, speaking, etc. So the whole brain is responsible for our language learning and speaking. So there are we should have a healthy brain for language aspect. Like that occipital lobe is responsible for visual aspects, and temporal lobe plays an important role in hearing aspects, that is auditory information. Then one more part, that is angular gyrus, which is situated in the occipital lobe, due to which the visual information is processed by the angular gyrus. The visual information will be understood by the Vernix area, then we can say or understand what is going on. So this prefrontal area, that is it is shortly called prefrontal cortex, PFC, and this is an important area in our brains, that is the forehead, the frontal part, frontal lobe. They are situated at the front side of the frontal lobe. This area is responsible for our thinking, because language and thinking are very much essential. So dear friends, the whole brain is very much essential for language learning. We have seen some of the parts in the language, how the brain is responsible for language learning, speaking and hearing, processing the visual information, auditory information. As teachers of language, or generally as a human being, it is very essential that we should know this. As teachers, teacher educators, and generally we should know that our brain is solely responsible for language learning, because our brain is very much created by Almighty, and the brain, our human brains are only capable of speaking, and Almighty has created as a very special brain for speech. So let us keep our brain healthy and safe and let us use language also very safe, without hurting the feelings of others. So thank you so much.